Now we go and start with an applause to encourage our new, the comedy show.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage your guide to the Red Planet, Mr. Josh Richards.
I apologise in advance, ladies and gentlemen. This is a 60-minute show that I'm somehow managed to squeeze down to 30. So it's not just me being Australian, I'm actually talking really quickly. So don't panic, it's all good. We've seen some amazing presenters today. We've seen people talking about like dreams and aspirations of going to another planet. We've seen Arno Wilders talking about how we'll do it. Robert Zubrin with his dream for so many years. What we haven't talked about today is how much it's going to suck. But before we get there, I want to introduce you to some of the slightly unusual individuals that have signed on for Mars One. So we go to the next slide.
Mars has been a source of inspiration for explorers.
Look at that hair! Look at it!
Because I believe that
All of these people have terrible hair. He's going to have to shave that.
Species, and it is also a platform for further space exploration.
I really
He'll have to cut that.
Furthering my,
So much hair is going to have to leave, ladies and gentlemen.
A colonist on another world, because we are trying to colonize another world.
I would like to help further my
You have to
species.
cut that, at least a ponytail, something to
One
pull it
step
back.
humanity.
His hair's fine.
We have jeopardized the conditions of Earth. So we need to find humans a new home away from home. And that home would be Mars.
And I want to go to Mars to make a home for my future, for
Because apparently he already lives in a canyon of some sort.
humanity itself.
This dude scares me. Not gonna lie, would not like to be locked in a habitat with this man at all.
I believe that Mars One's mission is the greatest opportunity that humanity has to take the next giant leap into becoming a multi-planetary species.
And that guy is a delusional idiot. Because that's me 6 months ago going, yeah, this will be great, I want to sign up for Mars. Mars is going to suck, ladies and gentlemen. The first mission, the first team that goes to Mars, is going to suck. It's going to be horrendous. And I know this because I've applied. I've spent the last 12 months of my life researching and finding out how much it's actually going to suck. Just getting to Mars in the first place is going to be awful. You'll be locked inside this little capsule with 3 other people, waking up every morning. 7 months. 7 months. Locked in a tiny little capsule, waking up. Slowly withering away from radiation. You know, you're disappearing from being in 0G. All your muscles withering away and disappearing. Slowly being baked by radiation. And like I said, waking up every morning. And I say morning because there's no real morning. There's just the eternal glow of the sun in the distance slowly receding away from you. Waking up, seeing the same 3 people, sucking your breakfast out of a plastic bag. And while you sit there and you look at each other and you whittle away into the darkness of deep space, you get to ask really philosophical questions like, where does the poop go? Seriously, what happens to that? This is actually quite ingenious, actually. Inspiration Mars are planning to do a trip around Mars in 2018, not to land, but just to go. And one of the ideas that they've actually proposed is getting hold of the human waste and dehydrating it, sucking all the moisture back out of it, because it turns out that human waste is really good radiation shielding. So now, you're going to be waking up for 7 months, travelling through the darkness of space, waking up, sucking your breakfast out of a plastic bag in a spaceship covered in shit. Seriously, that's a thing that's going to happen. And what are you going to do when you get to Mars? You got the same 3 people to stare at. Who are you going to hang out with? Curiosity rover? Can we go to the next slide? Curiosity rover does not care about you, okay? It doesn't give a shit about you. Next slide, it's too busy drawing dicks on Mars, okay? Curiosity doesn't care about you. Seriously, can we go to the next slide? Everyone keeps talking about, oh, Curiosity, it's just so adorable, it's a nuclear-powered robot on Mars, and it's taking selfies. Curiosity's taken that many selfies. Next slide. I'm surprised it hasn't started with duck face. Seriously, it's horrendous. Oh, we're checking the technology. You know what else is cooler than Curiosity taking a selfie on Mars? Can we go to the next slide? A dude taking a photo of himself in low Earth orbit, being photobombed by a planet. Look at that. I suppose this is what Mars One's all about at the end of the day. This is why this is so important, because we can send probes, we can send things off into deep space. Voyager 2 is, I believe it's Voyager 2 or 1, whatever. One of them is the furthest man-made object in space, away from Earth. Who here has an emotional attachment to Voyager? Oh wow, I apologise. Here's the difference. You can feel what that man feels. You can experience, you can see the smile on his face. There's that human connection. There's that real difference. Now, about 100 years ago, and I do have to thank Chaplain Putz earlier on for covering about half of my show, because it means I can slip through a whole bunch of stuff while we talk about Ernest Shackleton. But can we go to the next slide? Yeah, I've got this picture too, and this quote as well. Men wanted for hazardous journeys, small wages, bitter cold. You can read the rest. This is going to suck. But people still signed up for it. Over 5,000 people signed up to go with Shackleton. I'd like to point out, and I don't want to sort of pull down on the chaplain at all, this isn't real. This is not a real, this is something someone made up afterwards. What kind of sociopath would sign up for something like this? 200,000 apparently. But people went, and this became one of the most incredible expeditions of all time. They never got to Antarctica. If you looked at the map closely that the chaplain showed before, they never set foot on the actual continent. Can we go to the next slide? Now this is a picture of Ernest Shackleton. He's looking like quite a dapper, good-looking guy, you know, very serious. Next slide. Not having such a great time now. Yeah. Can we go to the next slide? But this is Shackleton's team. This is Shackleton and the 29 men that he went on the Trans-Antarctic expedition and launching from the UK in 1914 and returning in 1917, 2 years after they expected to be back. They suffered through 2 back-to-back winters. It was horrendous. But they loved it. They had a great time. And part of it, as the chaplain pointed out, was it sucked, but they were still jovial. They were still having a good time. And as part of the reason was because of the people they chose. The other, slightly more important thing that I believe all sort of boils down the real root of it is Shackleton himself and the leadership that he showed. Part of a leader's job is picking the right people. And there are so many stories from this particular expedition of Shackleton going out of his way. Ultimately, he always put his men first. That was the one defining factor of his leadership. He always put the men around him first. There's a particular story of Shackleton when they were doing that 750-mile boat race to try to get to Elephant Island, of them mooring off to an iceberg, and during the night they removed the mooring and one of the men left his gloves on an iceberg. There was no way to go back and retrieve them, so Shackleton instead silently took his gloves off and tried to hand it to the sailor. Sailor refused, going, "No boss, no, I can't. And Shackleton just silently held them over the edge of the boat and was going to drop them in the ocean. The thought process being, if you can't have what I have, what's the point in me leading you? I will always suffer more than you will." Can we go to the next slide? Now, I can't say, as I said, I'm an applicant. I can't say that I have the leadership skills of Shackleton. I think you'd be pretty much an arsehole to say that you've got the leadership skills of Ernest Shackleton. But I do know a little bit about surviving and leading during survival situations, and putting the well-being of people around me first. In 2009, I joined the Royal Marine Commandos in the UK. I moved over from Australia. I'd spent 4 years with our military, and I came over and joined the UK. And I was one of the more experienced men. Most of the guys I was there with were about 19. They were quite young guys. Some of them had very little life experience in general. And I distinctly remember going out on week 5 of our training. We went out on an exercise called Marshall Star. We've been battered, bruised. The Royal Marines is horrendous. But we got battered and bruised, and we got through to week 5. We went out on Marshall Star. And the exercise Marshall Star is about basic survival training. The idea being we teach you how to stay healthy and fit, and we also teach you how to look after yourself physically so you don't freeze to death. And it was November, it was just starting to get cold. It was 4 years ago, 2 days ago. It was November 17th. I'd forgotten that actually happened this month. That's a little weird. We went out on exercise martial start, and we'd spent 3 days getting battered, getting run up and down hills. Everyone is exhausted. It was the last night of the exercise. And one of the skills we were being taught is called wet and dry routine, where you wear one pair of clothes all day, and you keep a nice dry pair that you only put on when you get into your sleeping bag. The problem with that is you get into your nice warm sleeping bag with your nice warm clothes, and then someone tells you have to get out. And that means getting back out of the sleeping bag and putting back on those wet clothes. So a few of the guys got a little bit lazy and decided to just stay in their wet stuff in general. And then the temperature dropped. Now I struggle in Australia to explain to people what hypothermia is actually like. It's one of the most insidious things you'll ever experience because you don't feel it coming in. You're just always cold, you're generally cold anyway, so it's not really any huge change. As I said, I was one of the more senior guys there, and I'd been put in charge of about 9 guys at that stage, 9 other recruits. And I'd gotten into my sleeping bag and all settled in for the night and going, yep, okay, I'll get a couple of hours sleep before I've got to get up for sentry duty. And one of the other guys came and grabbed me and went, Oz, they all called me Oz. There's something wrong with Steve. Now I had to get up, I swore at this guy because I was like, fuck's sake, I just got into bed. Got up, got changed, went over, found Steve, and I took one look at him, looked at the other guy and said, get the corporals now. Get the training corporals right now. Oh, but they'll be, no, now. Steve had already reached what's called stage 2, edging into stage 3 hypothermia, where things are starting to shut down. The shaking's uncontrollable, your major organs start slowing down, start shutting down as well, and they start to reach a point where if they fall asleep, they don't wake back up again. So the first thing we started doing was stripping Steve out of his clothes, try and get him dry again. Corporals arrived immediately, and we wrapped him up in a sleeping bag, shoved a plastic bag underneath him, and 6 of us lifted him up. The problem was we'd spent 2 miles running through some of the worst mud I've ever seen in my life to get to where we were, and the nearest road was 2 miles away. I've done a lot of really scary shit in my life. I've landed planes that are out of fuel. I once found a booby trap when the steel wire caught me under the nose, and I went, oh, hello. I've never been as scared as I was hanging onto that sheet, trying to run for Steve, to get him out. And we got there, we got him to the ambulance that was already waiting for us, and I had to get one of the corporals to peel my fingers off the plastic because I couldn't let go because everything had frozen up. Got him away, the corporals jumped in the ambulance, away we went. I stayed behind with the troop commander, went back and went, okay, we're going to move the rest of the troop up closer. That's when we found 2 more. Now, there's few things scarier in this life than knowing that if you stuff up, 2 other people are going to die. There wasn't much the troop commander could do. We'd already sent the ambulance away. So I spent 2.5 hours screaming at these guys to try and keep them awake while they got changed. I learnt 2 things that night. I learnt that when things go horribly wrong, I don't freak out. I just step up and I try and look after people. I also learnt that I could never shoot someone because I hated the idea of putting someone else in the situation that I'd just been forced into, deliberately. The other thing I realised is, this is a comedy show! Why is this so dark? Dear God. Next slide. Sorry, we're getting all like dark and emotional there for a moment. This makes it theatre. Lighter note. Does anyone recognise this woman? Few nods here and there. Yeah, very well dressed, quite an attractive lady. Can we go to the next slide? How about now? This is Lisa Nowak. Lisa was an astronaut on STS-121 who, about 6 months after after a trip to space to help build the International Space Station, went what clinical psychologists like to refer to as batshit crazy and tried to kill someone. In fact, tried to kill the competitor, the love competitor to the guy that she was having an affair with. Can we go to the next slide? I bring up Lisa Nowak because one of NASA's biggest issues, and NASA's the best reference that we have for sending people into space, one of their biggest issues is having people being presented as heroes. At the end of the day, Mars One is very much looking for specific candidates. They're not looking for perfect people, they're looking for people with the right set of characteristics. So you can be a slightly manic ginger leprechaun that likes to jump around on stage wearing a giant koala outfit, as long as you've got the characteristics they're looking for. So can we go to the next slide? Resiliency. Resiliency, it's all about being able to push through when things go horribly, horribly wrong. And as we've already discussed, they probably will. But you find a way to push through. And on the next one, part of that's about adaptability. It's about being able to change the plan that you have, shift where things were going initially. Next one. Curiosity. Why would you go to another planet in the first place if you weren't curious about what you're going to go and have a look at? I know we can send probes, I know we can do all that sort of thing, but you need to have curious people who work as great role models for others so that they become curious. It's about inspiring that 9, 10-year-old generation of kids to be curious about the world around them. And I think one of Mars One's greatest attributes is the ability to potentially do that. We go to the next one. Ability to trust. It's a little bit hard to live inside a capsule with 3 other people if you're concerned about Susie stealing your toothbrush and cleaning the inside of the toilet with it. You need to be able to trust each other. You need to be able to work in a small group and be able to recognise each other's different characteristics and strengths. Go to the next one. And creative and resourceful. Things are going to break. Things are going to go wrong. So we need to find new and different ways of being able to live on Mars. Not just survive, but be able to share it with everyone else around us. So can go on. One of the men from Ernest Shackleton's team, who doesn't get a lot of coverage, but probably should have, showed all 5 of these attributes. One of the most amazing and talented sailors of the generation. This is Frank Wild. And quite rightly, he was Ernest Shackleton's left-hand man. He was the second in command of the Trans-Antarctic expedition. Now Frank's a pretty talented dude. And he's quite an attractive man as well, look at that. Wearing the pipe as well, quite dapper, quite serious. But I'll be honest with you, if I was going to take someone along as like a second command, someone who was quite cool under pressure, had all of those attributes, here on the next slide, I'd much prefer to take a hot bass girl along with me as well. Now, one of the things I didn't point out earlier on is that Shackleton ordered his men to take just 1 kilo of stuff. When their ship was crushed in pack ice, they were given the right to take 1 kilo of stuff, with one important exception. Any guesses what the one exception was?
A guitar.
It was actually a banjo, but the ukulele will do the job for us today. He called it important mental medicine, and Frank Wild understood that as well, and hence why we need to have a cool hot bass player to play along as well. We go to the next slide. Now, unfortunately, Nikki Moniger from the last image from the Civil Sun Pickups isn't available to come to Mars with us. However, this is Sian Choice. This is one of my best friends. She's one of the most talented comedians I've ever met. But more importantly, she's one of the best comedy room managers I've ever come across in my entire experience ever. No one messes with Sian. If Sian turns around and goes, listen, you're going to be on next, you're on next, okay? It's very clear. She adapts, she adjusts, but she's very serious and very forthright about how things go. Now, Sian has told me that the idea of being locked in a capsule for 7 months with me is her idea of a nightmare. But we do need a bass player. We do need a bass player for our team. If I'm going to be playing banjo / ukulele / guitar, whatever, we need a bass player, someone to hold the line, to smooth things out when things go a little bit weird. Can we go on to the next? Now, Sian's also a bit of a badass. I'll be honest with you. This is not a real picture. This is from Edinburgh a while ago. But you need a bit of a badass to go and take control of things. Can we go to the next slide? Because sometimes things go horribly wrong in space, as we've pointed out. This is Alexei Leonov. This is the first Russian spacewalker. Is everyone aware of what happened the first time we walked in space? No. It went fantastically until he tried to get back in. because his suit had swelled up. That happens. Turns out that's a thing. So Alexei just went, oh, that's fine, we'll deal with it. He just opened his suit up a little bit. Who here is aware of decompression sickness, otherwise known as the bends? Yeah! So Alexei managed to get back into the ship after nearly giving himself the bends. But then they found out there was an issue with the actual automatic re-entry program. They couldn't close the hatch. They couldn't get to where they needed to be in the right time. They were 42 seconds late re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. Doesn't sound like a lot. It ended up being 400 miles off mark. So instead of landing in a nice, flat, sort of, little area that would have been quite comfortable, lots of helicopters to pick them up, things like that, they landed in the middle of an upper Lapland filled with angry bears and wolves in the middle of mating season. It dropped to -30, which would have been fine inside the capsule, except the moment they landed, all the capsule bolts blew. So they again got to spend 2 overnights in -30. Turns out they were fine. As Alexei said later on, they had a pistol with plenty of ammunition. So Alexei Leonov became the first spacewalker and the first bear-killing astronaut. So, the next team member is Keyboard Cat. We've got our badass. We need someone like Keyboard Cat. Unfortunately, Keyboard Cat is dead. Keyboard Cat died in 2009. If you take anything away from this talk, it's that all of the cats you see on YouTube will one day die. Grim. Anyway, I bring up Keyboard Cat because we need a keyboard player. We need someone who's very accurate, very serious about what they do, but a little bit quirky as well, a little bit weird. As I said, Keyboard Cat is dead, so instead, one of the other options, next slide, is my best friend from high school, Paul. Now, Paul, that's probably not a great picture, actually. Can we go to the next slide? That's not great either. Next slide. Oh my god, next! Okay. Paul is a duty manager at Perth International Airport. He's one of the most talented, switched-on individuals I've ever met. He's also, as you probably gathered from the pictures before, a little bit quirky. And he's even quirkier if you lead him astray a little bit. One of my fondest memories of Paul is him playing as an umpire. Instead of playing in cricket, he would umpire it. The other memory I have is from our last year at high school. We had a slightly quirky teacher called Justin Lim. And Justin used to keep his students in line by decorating his classroom with dismembered soft toys as a veiled threat to his students. Slightly alternative teaching method, but apparently it works. And one of his favourites that he had was, does anyone here remember Tickle Me Elmo? Yeah? Instead of Tickle Me Elmo, he had a Tickle Me Big Bird, except Big Bird had had its head ripped off and the head shoved in one glass jar and the body in another. And if someone started being, a little bit difficult in class or whatever, he'd grin at them maniacally, grab up the body, shake it violently, and then put it back down, and you'd hear Big Bird go, "Ha, that tickles," and start bouncing around inside a glass jar. I found it infinitely more amusing than you obviously did. Anyway, Paul and I decided to play a bit of a trick on Justin, and essentially we organised a break into his classroom after hours one night and left him a ransom note. Paul cut down one of his other toys that he had. He had a soft yellow Teletubby hanging upside down from a light fitting with a pencil shoved through its head so it looked like an arrow. Great stuff. This man used to teach year 5s. It was amazing. Took it down, left a ransom note saying that we demanded the release of Teddy and Big Birds, didn't say who it was. Justin's response was to type up his own letter saying that for every day that Lala wasn't returned, he was going to sacrifice another soft toy, and organised his year 5s to bring in Henry the Octopus toys from Happy Meals and start cutting off the legs individually. This is dark, and that's okay. We responded by sending him Polaroid photos of Lala having guns pointed at his head by other soft toys wearing balaclavas, and then on Friday we decided to end the affair by slipping into his classroom during recess and leaving a nice wrapped up box. And inside the box there was some burnt plastic and a little bit of polyester and a CD. And the CD had a video on it. And can we go to the next slide? This is the video that we played for him.
They're still around here somewhere. What's that noise?
Got them, boys! Look at them! Got him, man!
Oh, for not
That's
releasing
Paul.
the people! This is your punishment! Ah!
Fun times, great educational stuff. Can we go to the next slide? Any guesses why we'd want someone who's a little bit quirky but very accurate and very dedicated to what they did? Any? Yeah, Frank?
Spirits up. Spirits up.
Keep spirits up? Yeah, that's true, the quirkiness. Does anyone recognise these people? This is the crew of STS-51L, otherwise known as the last crew of the Challenger. Most people know about Challenger, A, because it blew up 72 seconds after it launched, or, can we go next slide? They know of it because of this woman. This is Krista McAuliffe, who was the first teacher, was supposed to be the first teacher in space. I'm not here to talk to you about Krista McAuliffe or Challenger exploding. I'm here to talk to you, next slide, about this goofy looking dude down the front. This is Mike Smith. He's the pilot. Can we go to the next slide? Now, when Challenger exploded, most people watching the footage who understood what they just witnessed assumed that everyone died instantaneously. What started to come out of the recovery process later on was not necessarily the case. There were 4 personal egress packs that were recovered afterwards. These are the emergency packs that are used during an emergency that provide an air supply to the astronauts because they're cut off the moment something goes wrong. Next slide. 3 of the PAPs were recovered that have been switched on. The first belonged to Mike Smith, and the other 2 belonged to Ellison Onizuka and Judith Resnick. All 3 of these were found to have been switched on and air having been used out of them. Can we go to the next slide? The 4th belonged to Dick Scobie, and Dick Scobie's was never turned on. Next slide. The personal egress packs for the 3 others in the lower deck, Krista McAuliffe, Greg Jarvis and Ron McNair, were never recovered. These are the 3 people that were closer to the main tank when it exploded. The reason why I bring this up, there's a couple interesting facts about those 3 that were turned on. Now, Ellison Onizuka and Judith Resnick, quite capable of switching their own personal egress packs on. They could do it on their own. But someone needed to turn Mike Smith's on, and the 2 people that were sitting directly behind Mike were Ellison Onizuka and Judith Resnick. So after they switched their own air supply on, their first thought, they would have had about 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds to do it, was to reach forward and flick the air supply on for Mike. The other interesting thing was that Mike's actual control panel had switches flicked. They proved later on there was no way these switches could have been flicked on their own. They physically needed to be lifted and moved, which means 72 seconds after the launch, during the explosion, they stayed conscious. They stayed conscious enough, or at least woke up long enough to turn their air supplies on. And Mike Smith was still trying to fly a broken shuttle. The reason why I mention all of this and why it relates back to keyboard cat and all that sort of crazy stuff, you want someone who's very serious and very dedicated about what they do, but is a little bit quirky as well. They've got something different, because you'd have to be quirky to think that you could possibly survive a shuttle exploding. Mike Smith was still trying to fly the shuttle when it slammed into the Atlantic Ocean at over 300 miles an hour. That takes someone who's a little bit different, because someone who was just dead set, thought, this is how it's done, would know that they were about to die. Can we go to the next slide? When something like this happens, you need to find a way to push on. You need to find a way to recover from it. Can we go to the next slide? Now, one of the things that I would suggest, you need someone who steps in when it all goes horribly wrong, someone who's consistently happy, someone who just, it doesn't matter what's going on around them, they'll push on. So the 4th member that we need, next slide, is Animal from the Muppets. Because Animal doesn't care about anything except drums and girls. And primarily drums, let's be honest. He's all about drums. Very consistent, all about, just wants to play drums, doesn't care about anything else. The world could be melting down around him, drums. Can we go to the next slide? It's a picture of me at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 2012, dressed as a giant koala called Keith the Younger Management Koala. I just finished my festival show when I found out about Mars One. But before I found out about Mars One, I started writing this show. Can we go to the next slide? I met someone here in the Netherlands. I met someone at the International Redhead Day. One of the most beautiful women I've ever met in my entire life. And she is perennially happy. Not that annoying kind of happy, just consistent. Just like, it'll be fine, we'll push through. And a couple of weeks after we met, she came over and visited me where I was living in Brighton. And we watched this man jump out of a tiny capsule from 128,000 feet. And when he got to the ground and he shook his hands in excitement of being back on Earth, she turned and she looked at me and she said, I understand why this is something you need to do. Because for the previous 6 weeks, we've been discussing about the potential for me putting my hand up and how I was dedicated to signing up to Mars One. And she finally understood why it was so important. Can we go to the next slide? I'm going to skip this little bit. This is me talking about Mars One being a massive online dating service, but she's in the top row, so I won't make a big deal of it. So we've got our team of 4, ladies and gentlemen. But who are they going to be? Who are they going to be? Because on Mars, we can't actually send a full rock band, strangely enough. So instead, we have to miniaturise everything. So instead of a full-blown guitar, we take a ukulele. Can't take a full-blown bass guitar. We can take a cowbell instead. Anyone like to play cowbell for me? Because we're doing, yes, fantastic. Volunteers, right, got it, okay. Can you hold the beat? Just, that's good, that's good. Keep going.
Oh, keep
going. No, just. Do you know what this needs, ladies and gentlemen? Needs more cowbell. Who wants a cowbell? Yes! Fantastic, thank you. Okay, stop now. Stop it, because that's going to be infinitely irritating.
I can't hear you.
Okay, now, we can't take a full-blown keyboard either. But we can take something equally irritating, like a kazoo. Who would like a kazoo? 20. Seriously, I've got 5 here. They're not coming back to Australia with me. Who would like a kazoo? Yes, right. Let's watch how accurate I can be and make sure I don't wound someone. There's a guy behind you as well. No, dropped it. 3 more. Yes, fantastic. And 1 as well. And your lady up there as well. She beat you to it, buddy. Sorry. Right. Okay.
Keyboard.
Got the keyboard. We need a drummer girl. We need 1 more person to play tambourine. Yep, that dude. Okay. Yeah. Not the lady I was expecting, but that's fine. That's fine. Now, can we go to the right? Who recognised the theme song at the start? Flash Gordon? A few of you? Good. Because we're going to play Flash Gordon on children's instruments, and you're going to love it. You ready to do this? Can we play it 1 more time so they know what it sounds like? Just click on the... Right, can you match that? And again, first you to start stomping. And where's the shaker? Yeah, excellent. Cool, stop there. Right. I told you it's infinitely irritating, but that's okay. What we're going to do with the kazoos is we're going to all build up, and then you're going to hear, I'll signal to you flash. We're not going to play the music this time. I'm going to signal to you flash. And I get the entire audience to go, flash! And I want the kazoos to go... Do you think you can do this? Seriously, it's kids' instruments. You should be able to do this. You ready? Okay. We'll get the cowbells to start with me. And some stomping. There we go. I'm just disappointed. All of it. Okay, Cool. Thank you. Give yourselves a round of applause. Awesome. Thank you. You got the last slide? Just before I go, I'm finished. It's been an absolute pleasure presenting here for you all today. I've had a great time and I have run over and I apologise. A lot of people question about whether or not this is possible. People turn around and say, oh, you know, there's no way we'll ever be able to do it. 100 years ago, a bit over 100 years ago, we had the first Model T Ford production vehicle, the first motor vehicle that ran on methylated spirits. In 2012, we have a nuclear-powered robot driving around the surface of Mars, firing laser beams at rocks. So, if we can't get people there in 10 years' time, I'm going to be bitterly disappointed. So, thank you all very much. It's been an absolute pleasure presenting for you. My name's Josh Richards.
Thank you very much, Josh. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we got to the end of the day, and it has been for me a pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce all the nice speech and the speakers that were here today. And I will give now the word to actually the person who did everything. You know, I just was asked to present, I did nothing else than that. But Frank, I would like to ask you to give a very hard applause for Frank.
Good day, everyone. So this is my first time I'm presenting for an audience larger than my 2 daughters and my wife. So bear with me, and sorry if I screw up a little. First of all, I want to announce the winner of the 21st Century Timeline drawing map. We have some artists among us. And the winner is...